When Jake, a hard-working employee, uncovers his boss Claire's web of lies, fraud, and embezzlement, he risks everything to expose her. Claire, the charismatic and manipulative CEO of a boutique marketing firm, has been stealing from employees and clients for years while living a life of luxury. Armed with damning evidence, Jake brings her empire crashing down. But just as he savors the taste of justice, Claire strikes back with a sinister plan that threatens to destroy his financial future, and his sanity. As the battle escalates, Jake uncovers an even darker conspiracy involving Claire and a powerful investor who's been playing everyone for fools. What follows is a high-stakes showdown of wit and determination as Jake fights to take down not just Claire, but an entire empire built on lies. With shocking twists and a scandalous ending, this is a story of betrayal, revenge, and the lengths people will go to for power and justice. Hi, my name is Jake. I used to be the kind of guy who believed that hard work and loyalty were all you needed to get ahead in life. My parents raised me with that old-school mindset: keep your head down, put in the hours, and the rewards will come. I'd been living by that principle for most of my adult life, until I met Claire. Claire owned a boutique marketing agency in the heart of the city. It wasn't Google or Amazon, but it was a respected firm with big-name clients and a reputation for being innovative and agile, the kind of buzzwords that get thrown around in marketing circles. When I landed a position at her company, I felt like I'd won the lottery. I was fresh out of grad school, desperate to prove myself, and eager to make an impact. The job market had been brutal, and Claire's offer seemed like a dream come true. She told me I'd have opportunities to grow, that my work would be valued, and that I'd be part of a family. I was sold. Little did I know, her version of family was more like a dysfunctional soap opera where she always played the lead. At first, everything seemed great. Claire had this magnetic energy that made you want to follow her. She'd breeze into the office wearing tailored designer suits, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors like a metronome. She always spoke with authority, weaving big plans and even bigger promises. "This company is going places," she'd say. "And I want you to be a part of that journey." Her words were intoxicating, like honey poured over poison. I wasn't the only one who fell for it. The office was full of young, hungry professionals who saw Claire as a mentor, a trailblazer. We all worked tirelessly, fueled by her constant pep talks and the illusion that we were building something extraordinary. Late nights, skipped lunches, weekend projects, it all felt worth it because we believed we were part of something bigger than ourselves. But cracks began to show not long after I joined. It started with whispers around the office, rumors about Claire's history with previous employees, stories of sudden firings, and promises that were never fulfilled. I brushed it off as sour grapes from disgruntled former staff. After all, Claire had given me a chance, and I wasn't about to let petty gossip ruin my big break. Then came the paychecks. Or, rather, the delayed paychecks. At first, Claire explained it away as a temporary issue. "Just a small cash flow hiccup," she said with her trademark smile. "We're finalizing a deal with a big client, and everything will smooth out soon." The way she said it made you feel silly for even questioning her. The delays didn't bother me much at first. I wasn't exactly rolling in cash, but I could cover my rent and groceries while I waited. Besides, I was invested in the company's success. If Claire said things would improve, I believed her. I didn't realize then that her charm was her greatest weapon. She could wrap her lies in silk and make them feel like truths. The delays turned into weeks, then months. My savings started to dwindle, and my frustration grew. Some of my coworkers started talking about leaving, but I wasn't ready to give up. I had put too much of myself into this job to walk away empty-handed. Claire kept promising that things would get better, that big changes were on the horizon. "You're part of the core team," she told me one evening after I stayed late to finish a client proposal. "When this company takes off, you'll be one of the first to reap the rewards." Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. I wanted so badly to believe in her vision that I ignored every red flag waving right in front of me. Like the fact that while we were all struggling to make ends meet, Claire seemed to be living her best life. She posted photos of herself sipping cocktails on tropical beaches, shopping for designer clothes, and dining at Michelin-starred restaurants. It's just for show, I told myself. She's trying to impress clients or investors. That's part of the job. But as time went on, the lavish lifestyle felt more like a slap in the face. How could she afford all that while claiming the company was broke? One Friday afternoon, after yet another delayed paycheck, I decided to confront her. I waited until most of the office had cleared out, then knocked on the glass door of her corner office. She was on the phone, her feet propped up on her desk, a pair of red-soled Louboutins catching the light. She waved me in, motioning for me to sit. "I'll call you back," she said into the phone, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Then she turned to me, her expression soft and maternal, as if she were about to offer me career advice instead of an explanation for why I couldn't pay my rent. "What's on your mind, Jake?" I hesitated, unsure how to start. I was wondering about the paychecks. It's been a few weeks now, and I'm starting to fall behind on bills. Claire sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I get it, Jake. Believe me, I do. This is just a rough patch. Every startup goes through growing pains. But you've got to look at the bigger picture. When we land this next deal, we'll be swimming in resources. I'm talking bonuses, raises, the whole package. You just have to trust me." Her voice was soothing, almost hypnotic, but something in her eyes didn't match the words. For the first time, I saw cracks in her perfect facade, a flicker of irritation, a hint of calculation. I left her office feeling uneasy but still unsure of what to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying our conversation in my head, wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe she was right. Maybe I just needed to be patient. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't really know Claire. Everything I believed about her was based on what she told us, but what if none of it was true? The next morning, I arrived at the office early, before anyone else. I opened my laptop and started digging through old emails, payroll records, and company documents. What I found made my stomach drop. Claire hadn't been honest about the company's finances. In fact, she hadn't been honest about much of anything. The first red flag was the 401k contributions, or rather, the lack of them. Every paycheck, a portion of my salary had been deducted from my retirement fund, but when I checked my account, the deposits weren't there. I double-checked the records, hoping it was a mistake, but it wasn't. Claire had been taking money out of my paycheck and pocketing it. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could she do this to us? To me? I had given everything to this job, my time, my energy, my trust, and she was using me like a pawn in her scheme. But this wasn't just about me. If she was stealing from my 401k, what else was she doing? And who else was she hurting? For the first time, I started to see Claire for who she really was, a fraud. And I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. The moment I uncovered the missing 401k contributions, something inside me shifted. All the loyalty and respect I'd once felt for Claire dissolved into a bitter mix of anger and betrayal. This wasn't just a case of delayed paychecks or broken promises, this was theft. And not just from me. If she was stealing from my retirement fund, odds were she was doing it to everyone else too. I couldn't confront her yet, though. If I wanted to stop her, I needed more than just accusations, I needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence that could expose her for who she truly was. So, I made a decision, would gather everything I could to build a case against her. Quietly. Carefully. Methodically. Step 1 was to figure out just how deep her deception ran. I stayed late at the office every night that week, pretending to be working on client projects while secretly combing through the company's financial records. I found invoices, payroll logs, expense reports, anything that might reveal how she was funneling money. It didn't take long to uncover the scope of her schemes. She wasn't just stealing from employee benefits, she was double-billing clients, inflating project costs, and charging for services we never provided. She even had a habit of withdrawing large sums of money from the company account under vague labels like consulting fees or executive expenses. And yet, despite all this, she kept pleading poverty to the staff, convincing us to work harder for less because the company was supposedly struggling. One night, as I was poring over a particularly suspicious spreadsheet, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. There, buried in the fine print, was a document showing how Claire had restructured our contracts with clients, quietly replacing our standard clauses with ones that gave her full discretion over budget reallocations. In other words, she could legally shift money wherever she wanted without notifying anyone. It was a paper trail of fraud disguised as legitimate business practices. It was genius, in a twisted way. Everything she did had just enough plausible deniability to avoid immediate suspicion. But now that I knew what to look for, I saw it everywhere. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. This wasn't some accidental oversight or a desperate attempt to keep the company afloat. This was calculated, intentional greed. She didn't care about us, her so-called core team. We were just tools to her, disposable cogs in her money-making machine. But anger wasn't enough. I needed a plan. I decided to focus on two things: collecting undeniable evidence and finding a way to expose her to the people who mattered most: clients, investors, and regulators. If I played my cards right, I could hit her where it hurt the most: her reputation and her wallet. Step 2 of my plan involved getting access to her private communications. I'd already seen enough in the company records to know something shady was happening, but I wanted to see how she talked about it behind the scenes. Did she brag about ripping us off? Did she have allies who were in on it? That part was tricky. Claire wasn't stupid, she rarely left a digital footprint that could incriminate her. But she did have a habit of leaving her laptop unattended in her office during lunch breaks. So one afternoon, while she was out at a meeting, I took a chance. I slipped into her office and booted up her laptop. My hands were shaking as I typed in a few generic passwords. Nothing worked at first, and I almost gave up. But then I remembered something. Claire used her dog's name, Maxwell, as a password for everything from the Wi-Fi to her online calendar. On a whim, I tried it. Maxwell 123. It worked. My heart was pounding as I navigated her inbox. At first, it was all mundane stuff: client emails, scheduling requests, and the occasional spam. But the deeper I dug, the darker it got. There were emails to a luxury travel agent discussing private jet rentals, paid for with company funds, of course. There were messages to her accountant about ways to minimize liabilities, read, hide stolen money. And then there was the smoking gun, a string of emails between Claire and a fake vendor she had created. She was using this vendor to funnel company money directly into her personal accounts. I downloaded everything onto a flash drive and deleted any trace of my activity. My heart was racing as I slipped out of her office, but I couldn't help smiling. I had her. Step 3 was setting the trap. I knew that simply reporting her to HR, or what passed for HR in our tiny company, wouldn't be enough. Claire was the HR department, the CEO, and the owner all rolled into one. If I wanted to bring her down, I needed to take my evidence to someone with real power. That's when I had an idea: the investors. Claire had built her company on a mix of client revenue and private investments. The biggest investor was a venture capital firm run by a no-nonsense guy named Richard Wallace. I'd only met him once, during a company-wide Zoom call, but I remembered how serious he seemed. He didn't care about charm or flattery, he cared about results. If I could get my evidence to Richard, He would have the resources to launch a full investigation. And knowing Claire, I was sure there was even more dirt to uncover once the professionals got involved. But how could I approach him without tipping off Claire? I couldn't just send him an email from my work account, that would be too obvious. I needed to be smarter than that. I created an anonymous email account and drafted a message outlining everything I'd found. I attached copies of the incriminating emails, the altered contracts, and the fraudulent invoices. I also included screenshots of the missing 401k contributions, just to hammer home how many people she was screwing over. Before hitting send, I read over the email one last time. My hands trembled as I clicked the button. Now, all I could do was wait. Over the next few days, I kept my head down and acted like everything was normal. I went to meetings, finished projects, and even laughed at Claire's stupid jokes. But inside, I was a bundle of nerves. Every time she walked past my desk, I wondered if she knew what I'd done. Then, one Friday afternoon, something happened that confirmed my email had reached the right person. Claire came into the office looking rattled. Her usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tight smile and darting eyes. She spent the whole day in her office on the phone, her voice rising and falling in muffled bursts. I didn't know what was being said, but I knew it couldn't be good for her. By the end of the day, she called an all-hands meeting. She stood in front of us, forcing a grin, and said something about unexpected challenges and a temporary re-evaluation of company priorities. She told us not to worry, that she was handling everything. But I could see through her. She wasn't handling anything. She was scrambling. And this was just the beginning. The fallout began almost immediately. By Monday morning, Claire's polished, unflappable persona was starting to crack. She arrived at the office later than usual, her hair slightly out of place and her typically perfect makeup looking hurriedly applied. Gone were the tailored designer suits, instead, she wore a plain black blazer over an uninspired blouse. It was subtle, but for someone who prided herself on appearances, it was glaringly obvious to anyone paying attention, Claire was unraveling. I kept my head down, watching from my desk as she rushed between frantic phone calls and private meetings. At one point, I overheard her arguing with someone on the phone. Her voice was sharp, a mix of anger and desperation, but I could only catch fragments. No, I don't know how they found out. This is ridiculous, everything was above board. I'm handling it, Richard, just let me do my job. Richard. That confirmed it. The anonymous email I'd sent to the company's biggest investor had landed exactly where I'd hoped. Whatever was happening on Claire's end, it was big enough to shake her to the core. And it was only a matter of time before the full weight of her actions came crashing down on her. But I wasn't prepared for how fast it would happen, or how messy it would get. That afternoon, Richard Wallace himself arrived at the office. He didn't give advance notice, and he didn't waste time with pleasantries. The moment he walked in, you could feel the shift in the air. Tall and imposing, with a gruff demeanor and sharp, calculating eyes, Richard looked like someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. He called a meeting with Claire in the conference room, and while the walls were soundproof, the tension that radiated through the office was palpable. No one dared to move or speak too loudly. We all just exchanged uneasy glances, waiting to see what would happen. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. When Claire finally emerged, she looked pale and visibly shaken. Her usual confident stride was gone, replaced by small, hesitant steps as she made her way back to her office. Richard followed her out, his expression unreadable, and then left without saying a word to the rest of us. It didn't take long for rumors to start swirling. Some of my coworkers speculated that the company was being audited. Others thought a major client had threatened to pull out. No one suspected the truth, not yet. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the office grew increasingly tense. Claire became paranoid, snapping at employees over minor mistakes and demanding constant updates on projects that weren't even due yet. She even installed new security protocols, requiring passwords to access certain shared folders and restricting who could view financial documents. It was clear she was trying to cover her tracks, but it was too late. By Wednesday, the first domino fell. One of the company's biggest clients abruptly terminated their contract. The announcement came in the form of a curt email that Claire forwarded to the team with no explanation. She claimed it was due to budgetary concerns on the client's end, but no one believed her. We all knew something bigger was happening, though none of us could pinpoint exactly what. By Friday, 2 more clients had dropped us. Claire tried to spin it as a coincidence, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. Investors started calling the office, demanding answers, and Claire retreated further into her office, avoiding us as much as possible. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion, and the realization hit me like a freight train. I had set this in motion. It was my email, my evidence, that had started the chain reaction. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt seeing my coworkers, innocent bystanders, get caught in the crossfire. But then I remembered all the times Claire had lied to us, exploited us, stolen from us. This was her doing, not mine. She deserved everything that was coming her way. Still, I knew the worst was yet to come. On Monday morning, the office was buzzing with whispers before Claire even arrived. An email had gone out from Richard's office over the weekend, announcing that an independent forensic accounting firm had been hired to conduct a full investigation into the company's finances. The email was short and vague, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the team. When Claire finally showed up, nearly an hour late, she looked like a ghost of her former self. Her once perfect posture was slumped, her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and her normally impeccable clothes were wrinkled and mismatched. She didn't even try to address the team. She just locked herself in her office and stayed there for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, the investigators wasted no time. 3 men in suits arrived shortly after Claire, carrying laptops and briefcases. They set up shop in the conference room, poring over stacks of documents and asking pointed questions to various team members. I knew my turn would come eventually, so I prepared myself. When they finally called me in, I acted as though I was surprised by everything they were saying. 401k discrepancies, I said, feigning confusion. I had no idea. I mean, there were some delays in paychecks, but I thought that was just temporary. I could tell they weren't buying my innocent act entirely, but they didn't press me too hard. They seemed more interested in piecing together the big picture than grilling individual employees. By the end of the week, the investigators had uncovered enough to confirm what I already knew: Claire was guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and a laundry list of other financial crimes. But the fallout wasn't just limited to her. The company's reputation was in shambles, and with so many clients jumping ship, it was clear that the business wouldn't survive. The final blow came on Friday afternoon, when Richard called an emergency all-hands meeting. Claire didn't bother to show up. Instead, Richard stood at the front of the room, flanked by 2 of the investigators, and delivered the news with brutal efficiency. The company will be shutting down effective immediately, he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. We've discovered significant financial irregularities, and while legal proceedings are ongoing, it's clear that the business is no longer viable. You will all receive severance packages, and will provide assistance in finding new positions. But as of today, your employment here is terminated. There was stunned silence in the room. Some people looked angry, others looked devastated, but no one said a word. As for me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief. Satisfaction. And, if I'm being honest, a small pang of guilt. After the meeting, I packed up my desk in silence. I didn't see Claire on my way out, but I didn't need to. I knew she was probably holed up in her office, trying to figure out her next move. But it didn't matter. Her empire was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As I stepped out of the building for the last time, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served, and for the first time in months, I felt free. But this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. In the weeks that followed the company's collapse, the dust began to settle. I'd moved on, finding a new job at a reputable firm with better pay and actual leadership that cared about its employees. It felt like a fresh start, a clean slate after months of stress and manipulation. For the first time in ages, I could sleep at night without worrying about Claire's lies and schemes. But life has a funny way of refusing to let things end so cleanly. Just when I thought I'd closed that chapter of my life, Claire came back into the picture, and she brought chaos with her. It started with an email. It was late on a Friday night, and I was winding down after a long week when I saw her name in my inbox, Claire Stokes. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Why on earth would she reach out to me after everything that had happened? My heart raced as I opened the message. The subject line read, "You think you won?" The email was short but laced with venom. Jake. You think you're so clever, don't you? I know it was you. Don't bother denying it, I'm not stupid. But you've made a terrible mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with. You've ruined my life, and I promise you, I'm not going down alone. Claire. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. She knew. Somehow, she'd figured out that I was the one who exposed her. But what did she mean by, "I'm not going down alone"? Was she bluffing? Or did she actually have something on me? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided to do some digging. Claire had been surprisingly quiet in the weeks since the company's collapse, no social media posts, no appearances in industry circles. I assumed she was keeping a low profile to avoid attention while the legal proceedings against her played out. But when I started searching, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. Claire wasn't hiding. She was pivoting. A quick Google search revealed that she had launched a new business, a consulting firm, of all things. The website was sleek and professional, filled with vague promises about helping businesses streamline operations and maximize growth. It was clear she was trying to reinvent herself, but what really caught my attention was the team page. Right there, listed as her new business partner, was a name I never expected to see, Richard Wallace. My stomach dropped. Richard, the same investor who had shut down her company and launched the investigation into her fraud, was now working with her. None of it made sense. Why would he partner with someone who had cost him so much money and nearly destroyed his reputation? I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. So, I did what I do best, I started digging deeper. Over the next few days, I scoured public records, social media profiles, and anything else I could find. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became, and it was worse than I could have imagined. It turned out that Claire and Richard had been in cahoots all along. While the investigation into Claire's embezzlement had been legitimate, Richard had used it as an opportunity to quietly buy out the remnants of the company at a fraction of its value. The forensic accountants who had uncovered Claire's crimes. They worked for him. The clients who had dropped the company during the fallout. They were steered toward his other ventures. And Claire. She wasn't some hapless victim caught in Richard's schemes, she was an active participant. They had orchestrated the entire thing together, using the collapse of the company as a smokescreen to siphon off money, clients, and assets for their own gain. The whole thing had been a long con, and I had unknowingly played right into their hands. But the worst part was yet to come. As I dug deeper into Claire and Richard's new business, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. They were targeting former employees of the collapsed company, people like me. Claire had access to all our personal information, social security numbers, addresses, bank details. And she was using it. A few days later, I got a call from my bank. Someone had tried to open a line of credit in my name. Then I noticed strange charges on my credit card, luxury items, travel expenses, things I'd never purchased. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Claire was out for revenge, and she was weaponizing my personal information to destroy my financial stability. I was furious, but more than that, I was terrified. She wasn't just playing games, she was actively trying to ruin my life. I knew I had to fight back, but how? She was smarter than I'd given her credit for, and now she had Richard backing her. They were powerful, connected, and completely without scruples. But then, as I thought about everything I'd uncovered, I realized something. Claire and Richard had made one critical mistake. They thought they were untouchable, that no one could expose them for what they really were. But they'd underestimated me. I took all the evidence I'd gathered, the forged contracts, the fraudulent invoices, the emails between Claire and Richard, and compiled it into a dossier. Then I contacted a journalist at one of the largest business publications in the country. The journalist, a sharp and relentless reporter named Lisa, was immediately intrigued. When I laid everything out for her, she couldn't believe the audacity of their scheme. "This could be huge," she said. "If even half of this checks out, it's going to blow up in their faces." Over the next few weeks, Lisa conducted her own investigation, verifying every piece of evidence I provided and uncovering even more dirt on Claire and Richard. When the story finally broke, it was a media firestorm. The headline read, "Corporate Conspiracy: How a CEO and Investor Stole Millions and Betrayed Their Employees." The article exposed everything: the embezzlement, the staged collapse of the company, the fraudulent new business. It included quotes from former clients, employees, and even anonymous investors who had been burned by Claire and Richard's schemes. The fallout was immediate. Within hours of the article going live, Claire and Richard's new business lost all its clients. Regulators announced a full investigation, freezing their accounts and assets. Social media erupted with outrage, and their reputations were completely destroyed. For the first time, Claire couldn't talk her way out of it. She and Richard were finished. But the best part? The journalist made sure to highlight the voices of the employees they had wronged, people like me. My name wasn't mentioned in the article, but it didn't need to be. I knew I had played a role in bringing them down, and that was enough. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with Claire. But as I read the article one last time, a small, unsettling thought crept into my mind: Claire had always been a survivor. No matter how bad things got, she always found a way to land on her feet. This time felt different. This time felt final. But with someone like Claire, could you ever really be sure? For now, though, I was content to sit back and watch the empire she and Richard had built burn to the ground. And I couldn't help but smile.